Today on Inspired Money.
So I went from being highly influential, having a lot of money, having a good relationship, and all of a sudden I'm professionally irrelevant. All of my money goes away, my relationship goes away, and you're completely unmoored as a human being. I have no worth, I have no ability to serve, and service is important to us folks.
This is episode 102 with soldier and spy turned entrepreneur and podcaster, Pete A. Turner. Welcome to Inspired Money. My name is Andy Wong, a managing partner at Runnymede Capital Management. Each week, we bring you an interesting person to help you get inspired, shift your perspectives on money, and achieve incredible things. From making it to giving it away, Inspired Money means making a difference, creating something bigger than oneself, and maybe, just maybe, making the world a better place. Thank you for joining me. Hey, Inspired Moneymaker, welcome back. If it's your first time listening, welcome. Here at Inspired Money, we want to help each other to live richer lives, make a greater impact, and together, make the world a better place. Today's guest is Pete A. Turner. He's a combat veteran and former Army spy. I love talking to guests about money, but I wondered how Pete's thoughts about money might have been shaped by his hazardous overseas experiences in Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. In this episode, you'll learn what it's like to be an Army spy in hostile areas. We can all learn about better communication skills, being proactive and tactical, challenges that veterans face when returning home. And Pete talks about building trust through exchanges of trust, big and small. And what kept him alive on the battlefield just might help you on a sales call. Now let's get inspired with Pete A. Turner. Pete, welcome to Inspired Money. It's so great to have you on the show.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate it. Anytime to get a chance to be on somebody else's air is valuable to me, so I appreciate you letting me on.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you. Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
Oh, this is a great question. I should say my memory is such that I have very, very early memories, before even being 2 years old. I have certain things that were in there. And I remember watching my dad stack dollar bills like he was just counting his money that he had in his pocket, I imagine. I don't have that context anymore in my memory, but I remember watching him just sort through it. And it was fascinating to me that he took the time to count it. And then when you would count money all the time, you'd count it twice to make sure it was there. And so I asked him what he was doing. He's like, I'm counting my money. And I'm like, okay. And then he did it again. I'm like, how come you're doing it again? And he said basically like you have to double check your money at all the time to make sure that you're right and that no one's taking it from you because it's very valuable. And that lesson stuck in my head. One of the very first things I think I brought into my world, that was taught to me.
It's a really good lesson. And I'm amazed that you can remember from like 2 years old. That's going way early.
Yeah, it's not a lot, but there are definitely memories there. Certain things stuck out. I have a very long-lasting memory for those things.
That's really cool. Pete, you are a war hero. You did over 70 months of combat zones, 1,000 combat zones outside the wire, which I understand means that you went outside of the safe confines of base camp. Did you enlist because of financial reasons?
To be honest, it was when I graduated in the mid early 90s, it was a really hard time. There's a recession going on, and it was like the worst time to graduate from high school, or from college, I should say, for a long time. So for sure, the inability to find a job was the main driving factor. But, I had jobs where I was doing things. I was working at Costco and making enough money for my, softball playing, beer drinking ways. But so I wouldn't say I needed money, but I wouldn't say that I had a surplus. And I definitely, what I lacked was experience. And that's really why I went in.
Well, you weren't finding Costco sufficiently fulfilling, it sounds like.
No, yeah. The moment that I talk about all the time, and this is 100% true, was I was outside in the rain pushing shopping carts, having recently been brought in as a permanent Costco employee and not a seasonal person. And so, you got to work up from the bottom. I didn't mind that, but I thought I don't want this to be where and there's nothing wrong with that work. And the people that stayed there, I'm sure, were great people. But like, I want to do something else, something more, something bigger. And I could not figure it out on my own. So that's where the military came in and gave me a wonderful opportunity.
How did that Army opportunity come to be? Like, how did you discover it?
You know, it was funny. Again, at Costco, I was had an early morning shift and we were stocking shelves. Another guy, similar situation, had graduated and we just could not find work. And he was talking. He's like, I'm thinking about going and becoming, a spy. And I'm like, well, how do you do that? And he's like, well, you can join the Army. And this guy had a private education in high school. He went to De La Salle, one of the most notable private schools in California. And then he had a fancy high-end BA degree from I think it was Cal, if I remember correctly. So he had all the pedigree. I had a terrible GPA and a Cal State education. Nothing wrong with that. But if he was struggling, I was like, gosh, I'm really going to struggle. So we just were talking about it and I thought, yeah, I've been reading Tom Clancy books and that sounds interesting. I'd never, until that moment right then, I'd never even considered the military as an option. And then a month later, I was in it.
Interestingly, it was kind of the allure of becoming a spy, but that was no guarantee when you enlisted, but it did end up playing out that way.
Yeah, 100% true. There was no guarantee at all. And at one point, I almost became an infantry guy. But my recruiter, and I'm probably the only person ever to say this, my recruiter did a great job. They set me up, and it was exactly what he thought it would be. And I'm nothing but grateful for him for keeping me on the path, because I easily could have switched tracks, because I could have been influenced to do anything. And in this case, he was there to provide the influence to say, no, stay on this track. This is going to be good for you. And it was.
How was your decision received by your family?
I'm pretty independent, and that's been a pattern that I didn't know at the time that was the case. A standard Gen X thing. I was like a free range kid, a latchkey kid. I didn't want my friends to influence my decisions. I sort of had a rule back then where girls and friends won't influence my big decisions. My day-to-day things, whatever. But when it came to these things, I wanted to isolate, figure out what I wanted to do, grab the opinions of several people, and then, hold them to some secrecy, because I really wanted to make my own decision. And I was on the fence, but like I said, I was pushing carts in the rain, and I thought, nope, I can see myself this is too comfortable. It's very easy for me to do this and continue. I was getting ready for the next season of rec league softball, and I thought, I don't want to do this. There's plenty of things I can do. Let me go do it. So for me, when I made that decision, it didn't matter what anybody else was going to say to me. I had already made up my mind, and I was an adult. I was 24 years old when I joined the Army. So, it was up to me completely. And my parents, only thing they could say was, okay.
I mean, this was before September 11th, but even then it was like post-Gulf War. I mean, they must have been a little bit worried for your safety.
Oh, sure. I mean, their parents, they don't want me to be hurt or anything. We have some military in our family, but we weren't steeped in that. So we really didn't know enough to know anything. And there was quite a lull after the Gulf War. And that's sort of where I started, was like, we don't know what we're going to do next. All of our jobs were in flux. We weren't sure how to train, because we weren't going to fight the Russians anymore. We just didn't know what was going to happen. So really, if anything, if there was a time in the last 25 years to join the military for a parent to be calm, it was probably that time.
Can you quickly take us through like what your personal path looked like?
Yeah, for sure. So I did 5 years of active time, which at the time seemed like a long time, but I was getting older, so that 5 years was a manageable thing. I mean, 5 years for college, 5 years, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Certainly. And I had a friend that had gone off on his mission he's a Mormon. And so he was gone for 2 years, and I'm like, gosh, it seems like he's barely just left and he's going to be back in 6 months. So I thought, I can certainly do 5 years. And then you have the last 3 years, which typically, if you go active, are served in inactive status. You don't have to do anything. But I got the itch to try to go back, and I was trying to sort myself out post being in the Army. And so I did some reserve times, and I was in the reserves when 9/11 happened.
Yeah, and tell me about that day. What were you doing?
Oh, gosh. Well, I was selling computers for a company called CDW. I'm working in the government branch. And I was talking to a school, I think in North Carolina or Florida, if memory serves. And all of a sudden, there was all this screaming going on. And I sort of sat back, because it wasn't a normal call. I mean, I'd call places where like the person had literally died on the way to work. You encounter all kinds of randomness when you call people for a living. And so I stood up to see, because it seemed like there was a commotion around me, like in the office space. And all of a sudden, all the groundhogs, all their heads started popping up around me. And I'm like, there's something going on here. And the lady was screaming that a plane had smashed into the Twin Towers. And I thought, oh, that's happened before. That's going to be terrible. But then moments later, the second plane hit. And so I took off my headset, hung up my phone, went to my boss, and he knew I was in the reserves. And I said, I have got a place to be besides this. I've got to go to my unit. I don't know what's going to happen next. And we were in Chicago, so we didn't know. It could have been us next. And so my job was to report to my unit and stand by. And so I was at my unit before the first building came down. So quickly able to get to my unit and just was on standby status until they ultimately told us to go inside. Someone came and opened the door. I mean, I beat the person with the keys there because I worked so close to it. And then basically me and another soldier sat there and just sort of waited as we tried to all sort out what was going to happen next.
At that time, you were sort of in an in-between stage because you were still in the reserves, but you had integrated into like life as a computer salesman. What were your feelings at that time, kind of corporate world versus being in the military? Like, what did you like or not like?
Well, yeah, that's a great question, because for me, I wasn't really in the military anymore. Like, I had transitioned. I was this computer sales guy, and I was trying to figure that out. And I wasn't necessarily a high performer, but I was a big worker. So I would outwork a lot of people, and that made me employable there. Otherwise, my numbers were questionable. I hadn't really broken out and figured it out. And mostly because I hadn't fit in with the company as good as some of my peers had. So I was sort of trying to figure that out. And that was kind of the reason why I had the Army thing, because I just was sorting things out. That was the biggest problem. I'm very independent. And I've got a master's degree at this point. And so my boss would look at me and say, how do I motivate you? And I'm like, well, you have a job I can replace 10 times over. I can get 100 people to pay me not enough money and ask me to do work and get mad and give me a goal that ever increases that I can't meet. I could be honest like that. And so it made him uneasy, and because I was already uneasy, but I had no problem expressing it. So I suppose I'm saying that because I was fully out of the military, and I get out permanently forever in 2002, right? So, just a few months later and my contract is up and I don't ever have to do anything in the military again. So my future at that point was not a military future, but it turned out my future actually wasn't a corporate future at all, because I just wasn't and haven't ever been wired for it, but I didn't know that at the time.
Did a part of you yearn for the military life again?
It's funny because my peers at work knew that I was in the Army, for the reserves. And then as these things started to evolve, I'm like, what I do is I'm a spy, and I go out and talk to people, and they're like, you're a spy? Like, I didn't seem like that. My civilian persona was quite a bit different than my military persona. And so for them, it was a complete shock. Like, everybody has these regular jobs. Like, I drive trucks. I manage people who drive trucks. I get the parts for people who drive truck. It's those kind of jobs. And those are normal jobs we all can understand. But when I'm like, no, I'm a spy, and they're like, yeah, come on. And I'm like, well, look, here's what I do. I go into town and I get the enemy to trust me, and I get them to tell me things that they wouldn't otherwise tell me, which is a very basic way to explain what I do. And they're like, yeah, but how do you do that? And I'm like, and so I would show them. I'm like, we'll go out drinking tonight, and I will get your emotions so wound up that you'll yell at me, call me, a son of a whatever. And then I'm going to point at you and go, I got you. I told you I would do it, and now I've delivered. And then you're going to be so wound up, you're going to wave that off and still want to argue with me about the thing that I bring up. And that happened exactly. And I looked at my friend Dennis. I'm like, you see what's happening? And he's like, I see what's happening. So I point at my other friend, and I do the whole thing. So they didn't know me like this military person. So I had to get back into the game and, get into the proper shape to do all this stuff. But really for me, it was a crazy transition, because I went from having this life of relative stability to, among other things, considering and going and working with the CIA's clandestine service. Because that path was wide open to me if I wanted to choose it. I could have, but I sort of ended up on this, not in the military, but with the military path of being a federal employee or a contract employee.
Okay, before we get into that, it seems to me that your skills that you had gained as a spy, those seem like really good skills for a salesperson.
they're exactly a salesperson's skill set. Absolutely. 100%. What I do best is go out and do things. And I would tell my boss, I'm like, I had several ideas where I'm like, there's money right here. And then he would like it, but the corporation wasn't creative enough to allow me to do this. And it wasn't just me. There are a lot of my peers from that era went on to do things, and they're now vice presidents of things, but they didn't stick at CDW because they had a different kind of development track. And if you didn't fit in, they just sort of let you work yourself out and then take off, and either they'd fire you or you would quit. They had an attrition model where whoever stuck performed. And there are a whole number of us. It shocks me the amount of waste, because they spent a lot of time and effort developing us through a little bit of creativity. Because I had a multi-million-dollar segment that I had identified, and I talked to, there's a Microsoft product, and I'm like, I think I should be working this with you guys exclusively, like a liaison. And the lady at Microsoft was like, it would be the smartest thing your company did, because you guys are leaving a lot of money on the table. So Microsoft told me it was a good idea. And my company couldn't pull the trigger. So that was one of the big moments for me where I looked and said, they really don't have a long-term plan for me, because they just walked away from tens of millions of dollars of revenue.
Yeah, so people complain about our government being inefficient, but welcome to corporate America too.
Yeah. And actually the guy who told me that was really insulting. And so he was a bad manager, and my degree is in organizational management. And so I've got a master's degree. So he's talking to me, and I'm not trying to say I'm the world's greatest, organizational management person, but he's talking to me at a management 101 level. And I'm like, you haven't taken the time to even understand who I am or what I do. And, you're going to be condescending. So here's how this is going to go. It's going to turn into an HR violation. If you talk to me again, I'm going to assume you're harassing me. And that guy cut me the widest berth the rest of the time. He would walk across the office to stay away from me, because he didn't want to encounter the part of me that would go over to HR and be like, hey, this guy won't leave me alone. He won't get off my back. I don't even work for this guy, and he talks to me, and so, and I want to say this, that was the wrong path to take for me, but it was part of all of this sorting out that I had to do out loud, as I realized that really what I need to do is go get into a combat zone and do what few other people can do.
When you shipped out overseas again, was that as a contractor?
Yeah. And just to give some clarity on what that means that the military realizes that they lack capacity in a certain thing. So it can be in intel, it can be in logistics. And so they hire that capacity. So I come in as a pro, and a legitimate pro. I mean, you had to have chops to get this job. And I was choppy amongst the people with chops, because I had taught source operations. I had done source operations. Most of my peers hadn't had that fortune to do that. So I was a very, very skilled person, and I knew how to work with the military in a way that a lot of lower ranking people didn't, because I had worked at such a high rank level when I was in.
So contrast for us what that means, your experience when you come in relative to a lot of the active military who are there.
So the active military are overwhelmed by the work that they have to do. So a lot of reservists come in, and those this is sort of like the doctrinal answer, right? So the reservists, they are like, hey, we need spies. And so they'll put them through the variety of spy schools that are out there. And then they come out and they're as green as can be. So not only do they have less basic spy training than I had, they also haven't had the field time and all of the other things. So they really are just like, get out into the field and go figure it out. They really are just throwing bodies at the problem. And so all of the elegance, all of the sophistication has to be brought in from a guy like me who can guide that. If that team will be guided, I can guide that team and say less of this, more of that, and really kind of coach them. But ultimately, what ultimately happens is that they're really not capable of doing that. There's a lot of ego going on. There's a lot of counter contractor sentiment. And you know this going in. So you just put as much effort in as you have to meet the obligations of the contract. And then you just some people just shut down and they just fill the seat and they just do what they have to do and do their time and get paid. But someone like me, people are getting killed every day. Horrible, horrible deaths for the Iraqis and the Americans. And so I go over to the operators who go out every day. And I'm like, hey, I'm an asset. I'm not being used properly. If you guys can figure out a way to do it, I'll prove it to you. I can do this, and I'll go out. So the next thing you know, I'm I'm supporting the SEALs directly while still maintaining my very basic contractual job. So I was able to farm myself and my teammates. We all did this where we got into a spot where we're still doing the letter of our job, but we're also fulfilling the intent by going out and finding bad people and trying to do something about what they did on a day-to-day basis.
It sounds like sending the young newbie guys out to figure it out. I mean, it sounds dangerous.
Oh, I mean, it's all dangerous. I mean, I can't tell you, like, if people have maybe 9 lives, I've probably got 20. I've almost died any number of ways. And when you try to go out and do the job, if you don't know the basics of the job, because my job is very complex, right? There's the tactical application of it, but there's also the legal application of it. And there's all the tradecraft that you have to learn. These are all totally separate things that interweave into a more complex profession. And I'm just talking about one element of my job. There are other things. You could be a bug sweeper. You can be a lie detector person. You can do what's called strategic work. And then I was doing more tactical. So these people don't really have the capacity to do the job well. It doesn't mean that they can't, doesn't mean that they won't, but they as a team will not perform at a high level. They don't have the leadership and they don't have the skills to do it. And then here's another funny thing about the military is that people don't like spies and what they do. And so the unit that they support will often undermine their freedom to go do what they do. And so you have to fight for yourself within the unit as well. And so all of these things kind of go against helping that team get out. And so a lot of teams honestly stay on the camp because that's where they can do the most work. And it's not the best place to work, but it is the best place for them to be productive.
Coming up, how Pete won trust as a spy in the field, using cultural intelligence to your advantage, a veteran's tough time returning home, and more. That's next, right after this short break. The show notes for this episode can be found at inspiredmoney.fm/102. If you're listening in your car or wherever you are, check the show notes if you want to learn more about Pete or things mentioned in this episode. It's time for the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Earlier today, I was listening to the Stacking Benjamins podcast. You may recall that host Joe Saul-Sehy was our guest on Inspired Money episode 26. Well, I was listening to the episode entitled Happy Birthday, Mr. Roth, and in one segment, there's an interview with Scott Rickens, co-creator and producer of the Playing with Fire documentary. FIRE, of course, is an acronym for Financial Independence, Retire Early. Scott Rickens talked about his FIRE journey. Let me preface this by saying that FIRE is not for everyone, but in trying to increase savings, quite a number of people have gotten rid of one car and kept just one car in their household. In Scott's case, he and his wife were leasing 2 vehicles. After reviewing their costs, they were paying at least $1,000 per month. They ended up buying one used car for $6,500, and going forward, they had no more car payments. They had much lower insurance, and they used their car a lot less, saving on gas. Now, this is where I learned something. Scott recommended an electronic bike made by Rad Power Bikes that has a range of 25 to 45 miles per charge with a top speed of 20 miles per hour. It's a $1,500 bike, but for short commutes, it can serve as an inexpensive car substitute. So I'll leave a link in the show notes. There's no affiliate arrangement or anything. It's just something that I thought was interesting, and it just might be worth checking out. They sound like a lot of fun. You can save on gas and car maintenance, and it's better for the environment. That's the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Inspired Money is brought to you by Runnymede Capital Management. We help you to plan, invest, and worry less. What's your biggest financial challenge right now? Do you have a money question? If you need help, go to inspiredmoney.fm/Andy to email me or schedule a 15-minute call at inspiredmoney.fm/15. I'd love to chat with you. You're listening to Inspired Money. I'm Andy Wong. So how's it working? You as a spy, you're going off camp to talk to people, to try to gather information that you can bring back that influences what's happening tactically?
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty accurate way to look at it. There's a lot of ways to do it, but the way I chose to do it was to align myself with a battalion commander, and a battalion's about 1,000 people, and I would convince that commander that I was worth a seat on patrols, and I would go out with their patrols and slowly start to pull together all the strings from that area and build, do like a lot of working on my net and build a network that I didn't have to ask threat-based questions. The information just flowed in because I knew enough people that I could simultaneously understand pretty well what was valid and what was fake, which is a big hurdle, but also get ahead of some of these things, get a sense for it, and help the people in the analysis section get the information they need. Because I'm not the puzzle maker, the analysis people are. So they're the ones that take the information and put it together and say, look here, examine this, see if you can find this person. And so I'm trying to be just slightly ahead of those guys, anticipating what they might need so that they're able to have a more clear picture. I hope that makes sense.
It kind of makes sense to me. It sounds like you have to be pretty proactive in your role. It's not just a matter of a commanding officer giving you an order and you just following it. I mean, it sounds like you have some leeway to build your network, to make the connections, because you proactively were communicating with a battalion commander, that you were aligning with SEALs and like higher ups.
Yeah, and that's just how I approach it. There's a lot of ways to do the job, but that's the way that I understood from, teaching my peers how to do it. They all taught me. And that's what I realized was that when you stay on camp, you're reactive and you only get what comes to you. The people that you want to meet, you can't meet on camp reliably. So I've got to get out. Who goes out? The SEALs go out. And my job, when I have access now, and this is where it's like a news reporter, I have uncommon access to the battlefield. And so I can't bring back a common story. I have to tell them what they can't see otherwise. So you're right. The commander will say, here are 150 questions I'd like to answer. And they're rank ordered, so you know what's really important. But really, they're making these questions happen in a vacuum. Really, what you have to do, for me, is the commander has a thing called the commander's intent. And they'll say, I'd like to figure out why this is happening. And that thing could be something simple like, why are we struggling to get tortilla chips onto the camp? What is holding that up inside the zone? So I can take that as a tasking and try to find out why the logistics are being stopped, or why can't we hire taxi drivers, or why, or what, or who understands. So I'm trying to answer questions for the commander, but there's a lot of varieties of doing it. The place where I really stood out was answering the unknown unknowns. If you think about what happens when you're in a combat zone, you're trying to impose your will upon the enemy. And that's pretty easy to do for us because the military is so powerful over these conflict zones where we go. But what we struggle with is, how do we win? How do you, what's preventing us from winning, and what's helping us to win, and how are we doing in those areas? And so that's where the most of my value would come in. Yes, I'd find out where the bad people were. And yes, I could find out where weapons were, but there's a lot of people focused on that, the most of the unit. But the reality is if you're trying to nation build, which is really what we were trying to do, if you're trying to establish a legitimate government, and I go out and I can't find a trace of the legitimate government outside of the government center, then the commander wants to know that, because they're putting all this effort into standing something up, putting their people in harm's way, and nobody believes in the government. Well, let's slow down what we're doing here and try to work on these things. And that proved to be the most valuable part of what I would do. I'd have to go out every day and build networks of people, still same thing. And the threat information still flowed in. But really, I was giving them things where they now could marshal their resources in a way that they wouldn't have even known to do without that.
Taking like a 10,000 foot view, the U.S. has bigger weapons and you command a certain amount of respect, but you as an individual going out talking to somebody one-on-one, how are you winning somebody's trust and building a rapport? Because you have to establish that the other side has enough respect for you, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, you said the three things that are vital in this whole conversation, right? We talk about these things: rapport, respect, and trust. And even in sales, they'll say establish rapport. And that's the end of the lesson on that page. There's not like, how do you test for rapport? How do you know when you've had it? How do you know when you spent too much time on all those details aren't there. So I spent a lot of time figuring that out because I would watch people do a terrible job of doing rapport. And so really what I did was I just winnowed out my mistakes and my misconceptions until I had a lean model for rapport. And it wasn't, depending on the speed that I had to work at, and sometimes you have to work so fast, your rapport is, I'm here with guns, you're going to give me this information, or your day is going to get and you don't use that hammer if you don't need to, right? Because not everything's a nail, but you certainly sometimes have to. So my job is to go out and work from a place of rapport. And then here's how trust works. There's high risk trust, low risk trust. And you have to, because I'm an American, I have a bank of trust. I have a bank of stability to extend my trust from. And so I'll extend low risk trust to somebody and give them something and say, I'm going to trust you with this information. And I'm going to trust that I'll see you again. And these are low risk things. And then if I see the person again, that's a return on my trust investment. I see you again. I have to culturally understand that and combat zone understand that they can't just show up at 2:15 p.m. It just doesn't work that way. So I can't burn all my trust because they didn't show up on a Western stability model of, we're going to have this meeting. So it took a long time, but I learned how to have reliable meetings. And ultimately, instead of me showing up and taking a meeting from them, I would say, I'd like to set up a meeting with you. I want to do it in the appropriate way for you guys. How do we do that? And they're like, oh, well, I'll bring my cousins in and my religious leader is going to be here on Thursday afternoon. Why don't you come in then? It'll be a perfect time. And then I can introduce you to my friends. And so now I've done the respect thing of saying, how do you guys set a meeting? And I've trusted that they're not going to ambush me and the crew that I'm with. And I don't want to simplify that step. It's highly important to understand that there's a lot of dexterity that I'm not explaining in that. But I'm extending this trust. I've elevated to a higher level of trust where they're going to know where I'm at, when I'm at. And I'm going to get access to a network that nobody else in the Army in that area has access to. That's how you sort of work the rapport, respect, and trust aspect. If I say, these guys with the Army that I'm with, they're not going to want to show up at a predetermined time. They're not going to feel safe. And if that person then, this is the cultural part, they go, I will ensure your safety. Nothing will happen to you here. I have to say, is this you're saying this? I have to confirm it with them. They're like, yeah, this is on me. You'll be safe. It's all part of my deal. Okay. So now I'm wrapped up in his arms and I'll be safe. And so far, that's always worked. It has to not work once to make it a bad idea. But again, there's a acuity there and a dexterity there that I'm probably not explaining very well. But I'm not just trusting. There has been exchange trust back and forth.
And how much of that is trying to control and measure your risk in a very systematic way versus having faith in the person that you just spoke to when he says that, I guarantee your safety, it's going to be okay?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess I would add in a multiplier of culture. A lot of times in business, we hear people talk about EQ and being emotionally intelligent. And that's cute. It's nice. But if you're culturally intelligent, I'll win every time because I can use existing cultural paths that are foreign to me, but normal to you. And if I can accomplish my goal by helping you take your path to get me to where I want to go and you get what you need, I'm going to win. Emotional intelligence to me is a subset of cultural intelligence because I'm grabbing multiple emotional intelligence aspects and weaving them into a system of performance. So that system is part culture, it's part trust, it's part all, there has to be some, look, I'm in a combat zone. It's always going to be dangerous. It can always go sideways. It can go sideways out of my contact's control. Maybe the night before they kidnapped his daughter and everything was going to go fine until that happened. And now the whole world changes. At some point you have to accept that there's a lot of unknowns, but I would rather work in that unknown space and I'm comfortable there than to sit on the camp and let them come at me unfettered.
Can you tell us about the ethical burden to do your job well and to reduce the harm in these towns?
That's a powerful question set right there, just all by itself. So here's the thing. Ethics are situational, and that's not comfortable for people to realize, but the reality is ethics are situational. I'm published in a peer-reviewed journal talking about ethics of female engagement in conflict zones. And it's not, the paper actually is a feminist paper. We're for women, but you can't just go into a conflict zone and start improving the condition of women without understanding the condition of women, you cannot reliably do more good than harm in the way that we approach it. Is it ethical to do female engagement in conflict zones? Not really. Not unless you can deal with the ethical pitfalls that are there. A commander has to keep their people alive. So they have to commit the bulk of their time to lethal based operational training and tactical training. If you ask them to do something less and people get killed, now is it ethical? No, that's not ethical. They're there to impose their will, close with and destroy the enemy. That is their ethos. That is what they're supposed to do. And when you ask them to do less of that, you're now creating an ethical compromise, and you reach a point where I call ethical saturation, where you do so many things that are quote unquote ethical that the inverse starts to happen. And so your good intentions and your desire to do no harm are actually the opposite, and you create a lot more harm and instability. So ethics are exceptionally challenging when you're cross-religion, cross-culture, in conflicts, and all these different things. It's very, very hard to be terribly productive. Most of these things are deliberate, they're delicate, and they're fleeting, all of these wins. So if that's the case, how can you ethically go out and say you're going to do no harm when the minute you leave, stability is like a drawn bow, right? Instability is the norm, and that's the bow at a rest. It's very hard for you and I to pass a loaded bow from one to the other, and get the desired outcome. It's much easier for that bow to go back to rest and me pick it up and go, hey, this bow's on the ground.
It sounds highly, highly complex.
Yeah, it is. And I'm probably not even doing good enough job because I'm not giving you a lot of context. But yes, it's very complex, and there's so much ego involved. I don't want to say it's impossible, but with the training, and I'm talking State Department, everybody that goes and does this kind of work overseas, it is almost impossible because we just can't get out of our own way.
No, that's heavy stuff. Well, thank you for your service. I want to talk about when you came home and the transition from being out in, the combat zone to returning home. What was that like?
Exceptionally difficult. I mean, that's really where most of my PTSD was realized. I was fine. And I've said, and people who do my type of work, who do very dangerous work for long periods of time, we'll all say, like, I'd rather be in a combat zone right now than this. This is horrible. So I came back. I've got a master's degree. I've got 20 plus years dealing in very complex cultural situations, and I couldn't even get an interview. And I know, all right, your resume wasn't any good. I had professionals write my resume over and over again. I couldn't even get in the room to get an interview. So I went from being highly influential, having a lot of money, having a good relationship, and all of a sudden I'm professionally irrelevant. All of my money goes away. My relationship goes away, and you're completely unmoored as a human being. I have no worth. I have no ability to serve, and service is important to us folks in the military. We volunteer to serve. We need to be useful, and all of those things were taken from me. So I meant nothing to me.
I heard that you sent out 1,000 resumes.
Yeah. I'm like, well, I've done 1,000 combat patrols. Let me apply for 1,000 jobs. Maybe that's what it takes. And I was literally in a place that had a perfect job for me. It was a cross-cultural type job. I defy anybody to have more cultural chops than me. You can have as much as me, but you cannot have more. And I was doing TaskRabbit, odd jobs, and I was at a place that had a job, and I'm like, this is perfect. This is destined. The universe has provided me with this opportunity. So I brought my resume and I said, I would love to give this to Candy, whatever the person's name was, and talk to them about this job. And then I'll gladly do your task for you as well. It's win-win for everybody. She would not come out of her office to engage with me. I waited for hours, would not come and take my resume.
Pete, for your mental health during this time, how much of it is the money or lack of it versus just not being able to contribute in a meaningful way, whereas you had been like doing such an important job overseas?
Yeah, I mean, these are great questions. I mean, you're really nailing it. The money part is important, and the stress that the lack of money causes, makes me crazy. It makes me desperate, and that's not the best, Pete. But that's overcomable. I don't need much money. My life got a lot smaller. My needs got a lot lower. So, and they continue to be very low because I don't want the stress of money. I do not enjoy that part of my life. It'll give me a heart attack. But the other aspect of being basically obsolete it almost killed me. It almost killed me. There were times, long stretches of time, where I wasn't trying to get through the day. I was trying to literally get through the minute. Can I get through this next minute? Oh, I made it. Cool. Am I better? Can I get through this next minute? And I would minute like I'm a sophomore in chemistry class who hates it. I've been that kid too. I was literally counting time, and that was all I was capable of. And I didn't ever get to the edge of the building or put the gun in my mouth. And I certainly have peers that have, but I definitely got to the point where I didn't care if I lived or died. I just couldn't feel anything.
It sounds like a pretty dark time.
Yeah, it was horrible. It was horrible. Yeah. And I wish I could have had a job. But now when I look back, I'm glad that I had to go through it because I'm able to be honest and open about it. I might be able to help another veteran who's in the same spot. And ultimately, I shouldn't work for somebody else. Other than as like a consultant, I'm just I'm too wild, and I'm going to do what I want to do. And I'm going to be honest. And my candor works best outside of a company, not in it.
What was your process for reinventing yourself several times over in that period?
Yeah, I'm not handy, but I became like the top handyman in the Bay Area through TaskRabbit. I made them so much money. So, and it wasn't that I was handy. It was that I was great with people. Turns out my ability to go out anywhere and encounter any odd job enabled me to engage people and say, I want you to worry about anything else but this today. This is handled. Might get ugly, might be hard. I might come back to you and say there's a problem, but it is going to get handled today. You've taken this off of your list. Good job. And the people that I dealt with, office managers, housewives, dudes on the run, whatever it is, they all appreciated that. This couch needs to get upstairs. It'll get upstairs. You go do something else. I got this. And so I was great at that. And then I realized I couldn't do that forever. And my body was breaking down, and it was hard mental, physical work. So I had to do something else. And so I started the podcast, and I had no idea how to turn it into what it's become, but by digging in and outworking the problem, because, problems work against you. So I firmly believe that at least for a good while, you have to outwork your problem's level of work.
Today, you're an entrepreneur. You have a podcast, you have a podcasting business, and your Break It Down podcast, you've had some huge guests on. I saw Stuart Copeland of The Police on there, Gabby Reese, Jay Moore, Sly Stone.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I'm very fortunate, in that my spy skills blend right into this. I'm good at interviewing. Heck, I'm great at interviewing, and I'm great at connecting with people. And so I work my network now to find great guests and great partners in business, whether I can help them directly or not, or just put two good people together. That part of my spy skills has directly translated over. You're right. It's entrepreneurial as hell. And, I don't know where it's going, but it's working. I've got this machine, and it's not super tuned, but it does run, and it does get me money, and I'll be darned. People ask me how to monetize a podcast. I'm like, well, first off, you have to earn an audience. And I've done that, and I've done it through hard work and a lot of professional capacity and a lot of improbable success.
Well, I'm glad that you lifted yourself up from those dark times.
Well, let me say this. I lifted myself up, but I also asked and got a lot of help. I did not get here on my own. I've had a lot of people support me in their own way. And anybody who's entrepreneurial, you need that. You need mentors. And if you fear asking for a mentor, that's where your work is. Get over all of your fears. Find the point where you're like, I don't fear asking Tom Hanks to come on my podcast because there's nothing to be afraid of there. And he hasn't come on the show yet, but I will not be surprised when he says yes. It'll be normal for him. He'll be like, yeah, of course, Pete. Yeah, you got a legit podcast. I'm glad to come on. So I get there because I reduced my need for fear, and I got a lot and continue to get a lot of help and support. And this is a big thing too. I want to say this.
I'm of service now as often as I can. And I look at service as an investment in my own business and well-being. How do you monetize a podcast? Put so much value into it that it just continues to kick out value. I had the best day yesterday, 3 different podcasts, totally different guests, and just, I spent 12 hours, way too much time on a day I traveled today to Montana, and I had just such an uplifting day all day long. And everybody I was with, we all just beamed. I don't know what price you put on that. I don't care. I want more of those days in my life, So it's all about investing value into your business, not just money.
How can how can our listener help and support the veterans who have returned?
I've recently officially partnered with Save the Brave. It's a legitimate organization that I think they take 3% out for operational costs, and then 97% goes in. Everybody who works for them volunteers. And these guys do incredible things. These are my people. I know these people. I trust them. So I'm extending this trust to all of you. Save the Brave. You can have a monthly subscription and do it that way. You can donate your time. You can donate other things as well, but you can reach out to me at any of my places, Pete A. Turner. I'm not hard to find, and let me know, because this is what we all need. We all need more service time. And sometimes service is hard, man. Sometimes you got to stick your neck out, and sometimes it's a chop. And you're like, gosh, I really got burned on that time. But it doesn't matter. You get back up and you become of service, rather than arguing about something or saying you are gonna, or worrying about getting tricked. Get out and get to work and save somebody. And if you're worried about an organization being unfair and you don't trust my Save the Brave organization that I'm part of, go out to where there are homeless people and just start talking to them. You don't got to give them a thing. Just show up. Your presence is valuable.
Pete, I'd like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, how do you define success?
Success is collecting joy, collecting wonder. When I ask people a lot, when was the last time you felt just unbridled joy? And we all struggle with that question. When was the last time you were raging mad? Oh, that was yesterday. I was at the store. Okay. Well, I think success is having way more joy and giving other people joy. Money's great, but there's all kinds of rich people that have no joy and wonder. If you can fill you and your peers with awe, do that over and over again. Don't ever stop doing it. Give people enjoyment and pleasure. Fill yourself up like that, and then there is nothing but success.
I love it. And it's just a 3-letter word, joy.
Exactly. Stack joy, 10x joy, not money.
Thanks for sharing your story with us and sharing your expertise. Can you tell the Inspired Money listener where they can follow you and find more and listen to your podcast?
I'm on Twitter. It's really me. I really respond. I do my absolute best to respond to everybody. So you can be Pete A. Turner on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I try to be as engaging as I can. And listen, if you've got a podcast, I will absolutely help you. If I need to charge you money, I'll say this is the money zone. But I tell you right now, I do a lot of this. Call me up. Let me know about your idea. I'll be honest and I'll point out the barriers, but I will encourage you to do it. So definitely feel encouraged to reach out. I'm glad to talk.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for your service. Thanks for sharing a little joy with us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, man.
So what was your favorite Inspired Money moment? Did you hear how Pete said you could stay on base, but it's more reactive? Pete, on the other hand, was very proactive and chose to go out into the field. In a combat zone, that can be very dangerous and even life-threatening. It's a great lesson to all of us. Get out there and build your network. We may not be spies, but the benefit of building your network and contacts out in your field is going to bring you value no matter what it is that you do for a living. Thanks so much for joining me on this mission. If you had a different favorite Inspired Money moment and takeaway, let me know by posting in the private Inspired Money Makers Facebook group at inspiredmoney.fm/Facebook. The music you're listening to right now and all other music on today's show is by the amazing Jim Kimo West. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.